everyone. This is Sofia Smallstorm, and I am here today with a podcast. This was sort of an impromptu recording because I was so struck by what I was hearing that I reached out to this person who is a friend of mine, and I said, can we do a podcast on this? And he said, sure. He's a little hesitant, but, this is a very unusual situation. So I want to welcome my friend Carl.
Hi, Sophia.
Hi, Carl. Carl is a researcher. He's no newbie or greenhorn in any way. He has been digging on his own for a very long time into a lot of different things. He's educated me about a lot of stuff. But he's a, private person. He's not out there. He doesn't have a blog or website. And he hasn't done an interview before. Isn't that right, Carl?
That's right.
So this is his first. So we're doing this interview because Carl told me recently that he served on a jury. And this trial took a while. He was assigned to a courtroom. And it was a murder case. And the jury gave the death penalty. And I was like, oh, boom, hit with a hammer on the head. I said, what? And he said, yes. So I said, wow. And he started talking to me about it, and we realized there was a lot to discuss. So here we are for you to hear what Carl experienced.
Hi. What happened is I got my jury notice, and I showed up as you're supposed to, and for years and years I've been called in and let go after just, one day or half a day. That was always what would happen. I think because I had a job where, there was a financial hardship issue, as not just for me, but for the owner of the company. And so I expected it to continue that way. I'd always go in, and I was all ready to read my book and sit there at the table. And, well, no, I got called on to a jury. And we got into the courtroom, and the judge, very pleasant fellow, told us it was a murder trial.
Now, Carl, can you tell us where this occurred?
Sure. Riverside, California, Superior Court.
Okay, so that's Southern California, a little bit inland, Riverside County, Superior Court.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, and so then we were sent back to the main jury gathering place and answered a pretty long questionnaire. I'm not exactly sure how long it was, maybe 20 pages, maybe even 30 pages. I'm not sure how long it was, but a lot of questions about ourselves and our views and, our educational background and all kinds of things like that, and what our news sources were. I told them I didn't rely on television or TV or radio that much, or newspapers for my news. I got mostly from the internet. And then one of the questions was, how do you feel about the death penalty? From a scale from 1 to 7, I think it was. It might have been 1 to 9, but in any case, I went just above the middle, so I went probably 4 out of 7, or it would have been 5 out of 9. And because I'm not super keen on the death penalty. And but I favor it in certain extreme cases. And so the next time we met in court, we got to meet the prosecutor and the 2 defense attorneys, and we got this. Let's see, I think it's before we saw the defendant. Anyway, we got questions from them about various things, including answers we put on the questionnaire. And one of the questions one of the defense attorneys asked was whether it would bother me if a knife were used as opposed to a gun, or if that would make a difference in my decision. I said probably not. And the prosecutor asked a question about, he gave an example of a felony murder having been committed, or basically an individual driving another individual to a burglary, I think, possibly a robbery, and just thinking I think it was a burglary, actually. And the other individual goes in and ends up murdering somebody. And it turns out, legally, the person who drove him, even though he thought it was a burglary, would be guilty of felony murder and could be subject to life or the death penalty. And so he asked me, do I recognize them that legally they're legally they're equally culpable? And I said, well, if that's what the law says, yes, but morally they're not equally culpable. And so he acknowledged that and mentioned something about, issues of that coming up in the penalty phase. And so, and to see, one of the defense attorney asked a question. She just asked about where I said in one of my answers that great care and caution should be used when dealing with the death penalty. In a case that might deal with that. And so, so we went through a process. People answered various questions, and a few people didn't want to be on the court, jury, and we got down to like 16 people. So Now,
can you refuse? Can you say I don't want to be on a jury if it's a death penalty case?
Well, I'm sure if you probably could say that. Maybe it would have to be worded a different way, but you just say I have a real problem with that or something, and that probably would get you off, I would think. I don't know. If people didn't want to be on that jury on some level, they wouldn't have been on that jury. So on some level, I did want to be on the jury, I have to admit. I mean, in some level, I didn't want to be, but I thought I was while I was filling out the questionnaire, I was saying, this is a really big thing. This is a really important part of my life, and I actually can contribute to society in a positive way by being part of this, because I do think about issues of right and wrong a lot, and, that kind of thing. So
I just have to stop you for a minute. Do you hear a constant tapping or thumping sound?
It's probably me. Sorry, I won't.
You need to stop.
Sorry
I
about
tried
that.
writing you a message.
Sorry about that.
Can't go on.
Thank you for asking that. Okay.
Okay, no problem. Let's keep going.
Okay, so some people, one person gave an answer to a question that seemed contradictory, so I think that person was dismissed. So ultimately, the next time we met, we had our 16 jurors. We need 15 because 12 plus the 3 alternates, and a courtroom full of people were more possible jurors. So there was a quick, it went fast, but they went through. I don't know if it was everybody, but a lot of people, and then we ultimately got our final jury there. So 12 plus 3 alternates, and fortunately, the court did a really good thing. They know that people are really, it's a really big thing, so they try to make it, you put you at ease as much as they can. The judge did. He was a very pleasant, affable person. Even one of the defense attorneys was very pleasant. I'm not saying the other people weren't, but she was, sort of like a womanly, motherly approach. And the court liaison was very nice and helped make us relax too. I don't know what her official job was, but anyway, and everyone did a great job. The bailiffs did a fine job, and so we got to hear about the case. I mentioned something that I did before we got in, after I found out it was a murder case, and I had seen 12 Angry Men, and I remembered that movie, and that really had a big impact on me, and so I wanted to see it again, or at least part of it, and I ended up watching the whole thing on YouTube. So, because I wanted to think about this stuff. You don't want to convict somebody who's not guilty. You don't want to punish somebody unjustly. And it's a terrific film, and I recommend it to everybody, with Henry Fonda back from, I think, the late 1950s. So I was, I got to see the defendant, and I was thinking about him so much. Then I heard opening argument. Then the prosecutor laid out his case, synopsis of his case, and it was just an extremely brutal murder involving kidnapping, beating, robbery, and throat slashing. And so that made me focus, a little bit differently. So let's see. So we got to hear, opening argument from one of the defense attorneys, and one of the first witnesses we heard was a woman. Well, we got to hear from the common law wife of the victim, but we got to hear from a woman who had been in the house that the defendant lived in. It was like sort of a group house. There were, I think, maybe about 6 people living there. And
let me stop you for a minute. The 12 Angry Men, I actually found the link. It's the old one, the 1957.
Yes, definitely the old one. Much better film. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So I'm going to post that with the description of the show. But can you just tell us a little bit more about why it's so important to watch that film? Why you liked it so much?
Oh, sure. It's a case where everyone is ready to convict this young man of killing his father, except for one person who's played by Henry Fonda, who has questions about it. And he doesn't want to go into a quick judgment, a rush to judgment on it. And it shows how these people, various things in their own lives, were prejudicing him against this guy. And that was, at least with some of the jurors. And gradually, Henry Fonda starts getting them convinced that maybe he didn't commit the murder, and that there could have been things that made people believe that he had that didn't really quite add up. And so, it could have been that, well, for example, there was a train passing while the murder was committing, but somehow the time of it didn't sync up with how long it would have taken to get from one part of the house to another, or something like that. And there are a lot of things involved. The acting was just phenomenal, and lots of, issues of prejudice and jumping to conclusions were dealt with on that. And so
was it was it more of a psychological film, or one of these kind of liberal agenda?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it was both a psychological film, and perhaps there was a little bit of a liberal agenda on it. But on the other hand, I don't think it wasn't heavy-handed in that regard.
Right. Okay. It wasn't blatant.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were telling us about some of the opening statements. By the way, I still hear that thumping, and I'm just going to forget about it. It might be some part of this Skype call.
Is it still going right now?
No, it just comes.
Yeah, that's me moving.
It comes on a steady basis.
Right. Okay.
So I don't know what it is, but if it's something you can control, it would be nicer for listeners.
Yeah. Sorry.
It may be because it's your first interview, so you're forgiven. But anyway, so let's go on. Opening statements.
Okay. So. Yeah, the prosecutor was very serious, and he got his, his points made very well. So the one of the first witnesses was a woman who lived in the house, and she described she had been involved in the crime in terms of getting money or trying to get money. I think she did extract money from an ATM with the victim's credit card. So she was at a certain point was questioned by police, and she gave false testimony to them, and then she was questioned again by them, and then told some truth and some falsehood, and then ultimately she says she got the true story out, and I believe her that she did eventually.
Okay, can you give us a summary of what happened, what led to the murder?
Sure. The victim was from British Columbia. From
Canada,
Vancouver.
Right?
He was a man, 47-year-old man who owned a business up there. He was coming down with his common-law wife to vacation down here, I think it was. And he went to this casino in Indio and met somebody there who was enticing him to something, and I don't know what it was. But he left the casino and came back, and with that person departed in the victim's SUV. And at some point, he was kidnapped and taken to this house and beaten, and several ribs were broken, and his liver was punctured, and then taken from there, put over his head. He was taped. It was taped, and he was taken in the vehicle to somewhere out in the desert and made to kneel down and had his throat slashed 14 times down to his vertebrae, and it cut into his vertebrae. And
so this was all on the same day?
Would have been probably the next morning. Yeah, I think.
Okay, so he was held captive. He was beaten brutally and held captive.
Yes.
And then taken to the desert and finished off.
And this witness heard him scream and cry, "Look, God, please help me!" And they heard a loud noise, like him being slammed against the wall. And then there was silence. And her boyfriend at the time lived with her on the top floor, and he came back later that evening. By the way, they were all crystal meth users, and they're all addicted to that.
The people who kidnapped it.
Yes, and she was too. So she heard her boyfriend came back, and he just entered the room and just like kneeled down or sat down. Like I think he put his knees up to his body and just was rocking back and forth. He said the defendant hurt that man real bad, and then he wouldn't say anything.
So her boyfriend was party to this beating?
Yes, I think he was party to the beating, and he was party to. I mean, he was present when the murder was committed. So out in the desert, he saw it.
So what happened to him?
Well, we found out after the case that he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, as well as 3 other people involved in the case.
Okay, so.
But that's what we found. We didn't know that beforehand, before we made our decision. Go ahead. Sorry.
So he was the victim was then taken out to the desert, and he was. I think you told me he was stabbed.
His throat was slashed 14 times with the 14 incisions, and it got all the way down to his vertebrae, and you could see that he had been notches in the vertebrae, so he kept on cutting. So perhaps he wanted to cut his head off, but.
So they were like sawing.
Yeah. And so then we got to hear from another woman who was acquaintance of them and who happened to be walking by the house at the very time that the bag was placed over the man's head, and the tape. She heard the tape being pulled, and this is duct tape, or and placed around his neck or shoulders, and so she saw that, and then the defendant witnessed her seeing that. So
okay, but this was at the very end, right before he was killed. This was in the desert,
no,
so it wasn't.
This is at the house before they went out to the desert in the vehicle. Okay. Yeah. So she was threatened. She testified, and she was both the other woman and herself were very freaked out by it, but she even more so because he had threatened her. Not only had he threatened her twice after this, when he saw her one time in a car when she was in, the doors were locked, and he pulled at the door, and he told her that she better stop talking or she would end up like the victim. And not only that, so this happened back in 2007, November 2007. The crime was committed. In the meantime, he was arrested. He was in prison, and he contracted in December 2013 another inmate to murder this witness, and by means of a hot shot, which is some kind of drug concoction that the person injects, and so it's like an overdose. It causes an overdose.
So this is the principal murderer, the defendant in your trial. He tried to put a hit on this witness,
right,
who's a woman, from within the prison. He
Right.
tried to get a contract with someone.
And
Okay, go ahead.
yes, and he had made a detailed map of Indio and where she lived, and we got to see that and gave it to the person who was contracted to commit this murder. Fortunately, that person was informing for the police, and he testified too. Okay, so
can I ask you? You may not know this, but the hitman. Was that someone who visited him?
Oh, they had some common area. They could.
Yeah.
You know how it is in prison.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, I don't either. But,
okay.
but I mean, they had some,
I know they have some common areas.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so it was in a certain common area. He was able to talk to him and pass this map over to him. And I guess it wasn't observed. I'm not sure. But
Okay.
so anyway, yeah, that man came and testified, and he had a number of a few convictions himself, and so the defense were pointing to that, to him having this, and this would be, it could benefit him that he'd be testifying. So anyway, and one of the things the defense attorney said was that he was, he was a racist. He was involved in, I guess for a period of time was in the Aryan nations there in prison. But
the defendant was a racist.
Not the defendant himself. The witness, the man who had been contracted to kill. He was trying to impeach the witness. And so anyway, and then what was the and the prosecutor actually said that the defendant at one point said the defendant was not the defendant, the contracted. He admitted that this guy was a bad man. But the thing is, I don't like that when you use these blanket terms like, this guy's a bad man, he's committed all these crimes. Well, he did a wonderful thing, I think, by exposing this intended killing, So I'm not as harsh on him as they are, but who knows? Who knows what the reality is?
Okay. But still, this guy, the hitman, was a prisoner himself.
Right.
But he was an informant.
Right.
So the contract would have to go outside the prison to someone else, because you can't murder somebody from within a prison.
No, he was going to be released. He was going to be released.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
He was due for release.
And what he would have gotten in return, the defendant said he would do it to somebody else in return for him. So if he wanted somebody killed, he'd kill him for him. So okay.
So they were going to trade hits.
Right. And then let's see. I'm going to just check here. Also, the defendant had fashioned weapons in prison. 2 shanks we saw photographs of, a lock put inside of a bar of soap. He also broke out of one of the detention facilities he was at with another prisoner. They climbed on top of a basketball hoop and board and cut their way through the top, the chain link top of this recreation area, and then they climbed up, and one picked the other up, and they were running, and they shot him with pepper spray, and he kept on going, and then he was shot with a bullet, and it went through his shoulder, and so we got to see a picture of him hospitalized. And okay, now another thing is I want to back up to the medical examiner testified about the beating and the killing, and he said that the injury, I think I mentioned that it would have killed him in a couple hours, a punctured liver, but the throat slitting, it probably took about 60 seconds to 90 seconds for him to die. So you can imagine what that must have been like for him. So, so let's see.
Well, I think at that point, Carl, you're in shock.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't. I mean, you may know that you're alive, but I don't think at that point you have much pain.
No, that's interesting. Okay.
Well, I'll just say this: I dislocated my thumb a couple of years ago. I was lifting something, and it tilted on me, and I heard this horrible sound like a chicken drumstick being torn out of its socket,
Uh-huh. Wow.
And I thought, wow, what is that? And it was my thumb. I saw my thumb bent at this crazy angle. And I was terrified because I had to continue to load my car and there was nobody to help me. And I had no pain. It was amazing. I had no pain. I couldn't believe it. I was able to keep doing what I needed to do, and the pain came afterwards. So that's just a minor thing. Mm-hmm. I think the body shuts pain off at that point. But I've never had my throat sawed like that, so I can't comment. I would only assume that you are in deep shock and losing consciousness. I mean, everything is, you've got jugular cut, aorta, all of that, perhaps. It might take time to die, but I don't think you'd know it. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's just my 2-cent comment. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Okay, and we heard from several law enforcement officers and who were involved in the case, and we heard closing arguments, and we deliberated on this phase of the trial, which is the guilt or innocence phase, for maybe about 2.5 hours, I think.
So how long did the presentation part of the trial take? How many days?
Let's see. Is that, you mean including when we heard from witnesses during the penalty phase?
Well, you had told me that the whole thing took about 2 months, but you didn't have to be present in the courtroom every day for 2 months because there was interruption when more work had to be done by the two different sides, the defense and the prosecution. Yeah.
Well, it started towards the end of February and ended in mid-April. So it was like 7 weeks. But the first day preliminaries, we will not count that one. Let's see. I think the presentation of the case, I think, began on the 4th and so that was like 12 days total of that part of it. And the last day being the end of our deliberation. So we had 14 days altogether.
Over 2 months.
Over 2 months, yeah.
But you had to be available any day they needed you, right?
They don't remember them saying that for us. We had to be there 4 days a week, and they told us when we were needed and beforehand. So we didn't have.
So you had to be there 4 days a week. What does that mean?
Monday through Thursday, except when they'd have breaks. So
when they take breaks to do more discovery and research.
Yeah, more back and forth between the court and the attorneys and each other. So like the first day was in February. So the second day was in the 4th of March. So we had like over a week. It was like 10 days or close to that, and before we actually got started on the trial, and then we went like the 4th, and we went the 10th, 11th, 12th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 23rd, and and then we had the end of the that phase, and then we went into the penalty phase after a break of about a week and a half, about 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can't make plans in your life effectively. This is what you're telling me, because if you're on a jury, you don't know when they're going to be ready. So they might take a week off to do their work, but then when they need you, right? Yeah,
well, but when you're coming in, they tell you what days you're supposed to be there or available. And we would go there. There's only one day where we were sent home. We went there and then were sent home without anything happening because they were too busy back and forth. So it wasn't hard in terms of, I mean, you could plan your life around it, actually, depending, I could get things done. I could go to the post office to mail things after court was over at an hour, usually it would end by 4:30 or, sometimes a little early, sometimes it could go as late as 5. But also you had an hour and a half off for lunch. It started at 9 a.m. So, 12 to 1:30. So you could get things done then. I could, because I was in Riverside, not that far from the court.
Okay. So you want to talk about the deliberation?
Yeah, the deliberation, we didn't, we went over it and people came to a conclusion in, like I say, 2.5 hours. We believed that he had committed the act. We had no reasonable doubt on that. And so we went, back in the courtroom, pardon me, the next day, and, or whatever time it was.
How did they trace the murder to him?
They had, there was the photographs from the, the cameras from the casino and the people who extracted money from the ATMs, and testimony of these people who were in the pictures, and that was led to the police visiting him. By the way, one thing I did mention is he was witnessed by one of the witnesses pulling up his carpet, and that carpet was placed next to the house, and so he believed that there was blood on it, perhaps, and was trying to remove that and trying to remove evidence of it.
Okay, so the murderer pulled up the carpet in his house, and someone saw him doing it, and he put that outside
rather than dispose of it, which we don't know why he did it that way. Okay. But and we also saw some of the same tape that had been used at the murder scene that looked just the same at his residence too. So then we went back into the courtroom, and the jury verdict was read, and the defense asked us to one by one say whether we agreed to this, and so one by one we all said yes. And then we had this long break for a couple weeks, and then we backed into the penalty phase. And that was that was the hard part, because mostly it consisted of the victim's family members and the his friends of his testifying and telling us about how wonderful a person he was. And, he was, by all lights, a wonderful person. He was very generous, very fun-loving, very loving.
Okay, this is the victim.
The victim, yeah.
About. It's important to distinguish.
When I say he, right. Yeah, nobody, there was nobody who testified for the defendant. But anyway, so the victim's family members, and one of the friends of his who had was a worker for him, was given $4,000, or rather lent $4,000 to buy the engagement ring for his fiancée. When that person said, he was encouraging him. The victim was encouraging this friend of his to marry this woman. He said, "Well, I don't have the money for the engagement ring." Well, how much is it? $4,000. And he just wrote out a check for him and said, "Okay, pay me back when you can." And
so he was a very kind and generous person.
Yeah, and I think a very trusting person too. And that's how he got into this situation. And never would have imagined that something like this could happen. He was from, how it is up in British Columbia, up in Vancouver and Victoria. People are very nice and trusting up there. So
they are. I don't know. I've never been there.
Yeah, well,
but so you're saying that this man came to vacation in Indio, Riverside?
Yeah.
Where did it take place?
The crime?
Yeah.
Okay, in the city in the house and in the desert. I'm not sure if it was inside the city limits or not, but not.
Okay, so it's that general area, Riverside, California.
Well, Indio, which is
Indio.
Riverside County, but it's fair distance from Riverside itself.
Right. So I didn't know which city limits you were referring to.
Yeah.
So Indio was where this took place.
Right.
And we're near Indio.
Yeah.
So this guy came to Indio. That must have been for gambling purposes, because why would you go to Indio? I don't mean to insult Indio, but I do know that there are casinos there, right?
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what all the reasons for his trip there were. I'm not sure.
I'm just trying to fit it together with, you said he was so generous and nice and kind, and he writes a $4,000 check to somebody that may or may not be able to pay him back, and that's a kind of gamble as well, right?
Right.
So he took risks.
Right. I agree.
okay, go ahead.
So now the testimony was quite moving, and it did bring some of the jurors to tears, at least some tears, and almost brought me to tears. But and a few of the people said that they cried when they got home. But we heard the closing arguments, and we read the instructions by the judge, and we went to to deliberate, and we spent, how long was it in deliberation the first day? About an hour and a half. Well, let's see, it's about 2.5 hours, I think, somewhere around there. But we didn't reach a conclusion. A few people had questions still, and they wanted to continue to talk about it, and so we did the next day, and that was the hard part. I mean, I think that's where the real anxiety from the trial culminates. And so you're talking about all this stuff, and you're thinking about it, and you've got all this stuff going on in your conscious, and but ultimately everybody came to the conclusion that we should give him the death penalty. But overnight, I was thinking, well, what if this ends up we're not able to agree? Then it would be either a hung jury, or we go along with the other, with life without the possibility of parole. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, this guy is too dangerous to, be around other prisoners, he could do this again, and he's already contracted one killing besides having committed this murder. And I thought it was just too dangerous, and that was part of my decision. And the people had questions. Well, I think some of the people wanted to just prolong it, because if something came up, some idea or some aspect of it came up to us, then we can talk about it. And I think that's fair, definitely. And then one of the jurors was saying that he was somewhere between a reasonable doubt and zero doubt, as far as this man being the person who wielded the knife. It possibly could have been somebody else. He thought it's not reasonable to think that, but somewhere in between the two. So that's what we talked about. It's one of the things we talked about. And for me, it was, I had practically, I had next to zero doubt that he had been the person to wield the knife.
Now, what were the other jurors like? Can you give us a little summary of the different types of people?
Sure. They were, half were women, half were men. We had a pharmacist. We had somebody who worked at Disneyland. A couple people who had already served on juries. One on a murder trial, and somebody worked for the city of Riverside. One was a bookseller. That was me. Everybody was most people were white, some Hispanics, and one person part Asian. The jury, four women, half Eskimo.
Wow. That's unusual, especially in the desert.
Yeah, well, she grew up in Utah.
I want to ask you, so this jury, of course, now I forgot what I wanted to ask, but you were giving us a demographic breakdown of the jury. What about the defendant? That's my question.
Oh, okay. He was, at the time of the crime, he was 25 years old, and now he's 32. And he's white.
Okay. And then again, I think it's important to remember that this guy was a crystal meth user, and this alters the psyche radically. All chemicals affect the mind. I just put a post on my website about the Bruce Jenner phenomenon, which extends to a lot more besides Bruce Jenner, but it's on my aboutthesky.com Smallstorm blog if you look in the menu links. And chemicals affect our mind, our minds, our brain. We aren't who we would normally be if we are we are using or experiencing the effect of heavy chemical saturation. So I just want to say that,
Yeah.
even though I'm not trying to defend the guy, I just think that is a part of, it weighs in.
Yes. Yes, and I think one of the jurors was pointing out when we were looking at a photograph of the various people involved in the crime, sort of vacant look in their eyes. It's like a dead soul type look. I mean, he didn't say that, but it seemed to me that way. Something had done something to them, and
Were these like mug shots?
no, they were forward pictures. I mean, yeah, mug shots, sure. Yeah, they're mug shots.
Oh, all right. Okay, so you all came to the same conclusion, agreement on the penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And was it an emotional thing? I mean, at what point did you decide that was the way to go?
I guess when I realized how dangerous, he is, and how remorseless. So he, several years after the murder, he contracts the murder of a witness. So
Yeah.
he did a terrible crime, and he was a very predatory person, and he doesn't show empathy. I mean, he might have empathy for somebody who's related to him, perhaps, friends maybe, but not for the average person.
So he sat there in the courtroom the whole time, right?
Yeah.
You could see.
Yeah. Yes, you could see him. Mm-hmm.
What was he doing? Just sitting.
He was sitting and watching. He didn't show emotion. One time, where somebody saw him smile, was when he looked at his foster mother showed up during the sentencing, and he smiled and nodded at her. We found out that was his foster mother.
His foster mother, not his stepmother.
Yes, foster mother. That's what we were told afterwards.
So does that imply that he had been in foster care as a child?
Yes, I think so.
See, now there's another factor. I'm just trying to put different things together to get a sense of...
We didn't know that, but she was some people thought it was his mother, actually, because they thought they saw a resemblance, but we were told afterwards that it wasn't. It was his foster mother. And so I looked at him a little bit when testimony was going on to see, by the victim's friends and family, and I didn't see emotion, and I didn't see him when the verdict was read, the penalty verdict, but I was told by one of the other jurors that he kind of, I think she said he kind of smiled. So anyway. So after so we had to read our, we had to rather affirmatively state each one that yes, that's the conclusion we met. So we were polled at the, in the courtroom after the verdict was read, and then afterwards we were told we could meet with the prosecutor and the defense attorneys. They would like that, but we didn't have to do it. I think all of us were there, and we got to talk to the defense attorneys, and then we got to talk to the prosecutor with the defense attorneys present, and then they left, and then he talked to us.
Now, was there press there?
I didn't see any.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you would think that this kind of event would have made the news back in 2007, and that when it finally goes to trial, I can't believe it takes that long, but then somebody would have reported on it. So you're saying you didn't notice. And what about public? Was public attendance? Who else was in the courtroom?
Very few, if any. I mean, I don't think anybody who wasn't involved in the case was there. Mm-hmm. Or, except for the foster mother.
Were you ever bored in this proceeding?
Well, during one part of questioning, I think I was a little bit bored. It was, picking on picayune details of something or other. But generally speaking, I wasn't bored.
You mean the questioning of others?
The questioning of some witness. Yeah, sorry?
Oh, I see. It was in the presentation,
right.
the trial proceedings. So when they ask you questions as a potential juror, is that are you alone with, or do you have the other potential jurors around you? Is it public?
We have them around us, but if you wanted to speak privately and be questioned privately, you could request that. And one person did.
You told me that they ask you all kinds of intrusive questions on those forms that you have to fill out at first,
right.
The paperwork, what books you read, and so then when they pull you to ask you more, then they're really asking you to tell about yourself, and you're doing this in a public setting.
Right. Well, they didn't ask me what books I read, but they did ask what news sources I had, and they did ask about what newspaper I read, so if I read any. So,
did you name any conspiracy websites?
No, I didn't, but I did mention a certain newspaper that deals with a lot of conspiracy stuff. So I thought maybe they'd get me off of that, but I had to answer the question. I had to be honest, so I said I read it. So.
And now you also mentioned that you had gone to law school at one time.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in my the questionnaire too, and that didn't get me kicked off. I thought it would because it got me kicked off another jury a long time ago.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, so you've given the the penalty.
Mm-hmm. And the verdict was read, and we affirmed that we said yes, that we did find that, and then we talked. Then we went together back to the jury room and talked with the defense attorneys, and one of our jurors asked, "Well, why didn't you go something like an insanity defense or something like that?" And they said there were reasons why they didn't go that route, but they didn't detail them. They left us their cards, and at first I took the cards, but then I put them back because I didn't want to get involved with that. I didn't think anything would come up or anything, and then but
now were these public defenders?
They're actually private attorneys, but they were hired by the court, and they were very competent, I thought.
And how was the defendant when the penalty was made clear to him?
Well,
how did he behave?
You mean when the verdict was read?
Right.
Yeah, I didn't look at him, but someone said she saw him smile a little bit.
Wow, maybe he expected it, huh?
Yeah, the defense attorneys told us that they softened him up, like letting him know this was the likely outcome.
They prepared him.
There was a good chance it would happen. Yeah, they didn't want him to go in, cold on that. So we found out after when the prosecutor talked to us, he said there were other things we didn't hear that they weren't, couldn't be brought up in trial, but that this guy is a very dangerous man, and there'll be a lot of control and surveillance of him while he's on death row. So I think. Well, there hasn't been an execution in California, I think, since 2006. It's going to go to appeal. It's going to be a long process, and who knows what's going to happen. But
yeah, a lawyer friend of mine, I was telling him about this the other day on the phone, and he said they always appeal it. They never do anything about a death penalty conviction in California. It just kind of rides the air forever.
Yeah. Well, it was what helped me too. I was reading things that were uplifting, you might say, before we go into the courtroom, and I thought that was really helpful. It's really important to prepare yourself psychologically for it and sort of spiritually for it, because it's a really big thing. And what I'm dealing with, and it's probably the other people are too, are dealing with now anxiety that you don't even really understand where it's coming from, but has part of it has to do that we were talking about it so much, during deliberation, and so we're, it's heavy stuff.
Well, sure, but I would think that now that you've taken a position, all 12 of you, I guess, how do people deal with this? That they took this position and they were part of another person's execution. If it he's not dead yet, mm-hmm. but if it should happen, then you've been part of that,
right.
And that to me is a heavy thing.
Yes, it is, and so the prosecutor said we would be scarred by it but that we could wear that as a, something we could be proud of, actually. I don't know if I would say use the word scar, but it's something close to that. So I think the fact that it was such an extreme case and a clear case, and I think that that makes it, there's not as much. There's not as much disturbance caused by it, I guess. But I think if we found him if we found him, found that he should go to life without the possibility of parole, and then suppose he'd done something else, and suppose he killed somebody else in prison, for example, that would have been, in my view, that would have been our fault, because we shouldn't show that kind of leniency, and that if we had the choice between that and the death penalty, I think it's right that we choose the death penalty. He could have been given some other penalty where they have total, control over him, but they don't have that, They don't have something of that is like that. So I don't, it's really hard to know what's ideally how he should be punished, but I certainly think he deserved to be punished.
Yeah.
So now, and you wanted to talk about other issues too, or?
Well, I was saying, actually, I know of a prisoner who is in for life without parole, mm-hmm. and this was a double murder that he was charged with, and he did not commit the first. The second was in self-defense, mm-hmm. related to the first case. Mm-hmm. And you can read about it on freesalerno.com. He has a website mm-hmm. That is being maintained by others, FREE, Salerno, SALERNO.com. Mm-hmm. And, life without parole, that's what he is going through right now. And he's written tremendous numbers of letters, I think over 1,000 letters to attorneys. Absolutely no one wants to help him. His is a very complicated case, what I know about it. And he claims his innocence. He did not have a jury trial. He was talked into what's called a bench trial. So the judge was the one to decide, and so one person made this decision. They made a TV movie out of him in which he, I'm sure, looked completely horrible. So being in prison for life without parole is not a picnic by any means, especially if you're innocent. It makes it a lot worse, to have to endure that.
Yeah,
So all of these situations, I remember. Do you remember the movie with Sean Penn, The Nun, Dead Man Walking? Dead Man Walking.
I never saw that.
That is a very powerful movie also. And he did a great job in it, and I think Susan Sarandon played the nun. So that's an interesting film. I may link that to the description if I can find it on YouTube. I also read the book. Sister Helen Préjean was the woman in real life and played by Susan Sarandon. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was saying to you on the phone that these murder cases, as gruesome as they are low-level crimes compared to what, the elite are getting away with.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, yeah, it's great to chase down dangerous people who do terrible things to innocent victims of their craziness, the whole drug industry, the crystal meth. Get this. The DEA regulated iodine from 15% concentration down to 2% in America because they claimed that crystal meth, people who made crystal meth in these, homespun garage laboratories, they use iodine crystals. And so you can't buy strong iodine in America anymore. And iodine was so important for maintenance of health. It's integral to every glandular system, thyroid, which regulates all of your glands, and there are so many cell groups in your body that depend on iodine. I'm hawking iodine now. I would love people to read up on it. You can go to avatarproducts.com and go to the flyers and brochures, or brochures and flyers tab, and click on iodine, read about iodine, and you can order some from avatarproducts.com. It's the health tab. But yeah, you can't buy decent concentration iodine in America because of this crystal meth industry. And I'm sure that, the crystal meth industry didn't just mushroom all by itself. We all know about how the perpetrators of the whole drug world many of them are on levels of control, right? They're not just living in ghettos and driving Mercedes-Benzes. They're the people in our government.
That's what I believe.
Yeah, so they have this justice system that chases down murderers and drug runners and this and that. I mean, America incarcerates. I just read a statistic yesterday, and I don't know exactly where I put it. I ripped it out of the magazine, but highest incarceration rate I'll say the free world, but I'll just also say the world. And they're for these ridiculous crimes like drugs, most of it. And yet you've got all these hits put out on valiant people. I mean, Jeff Rense was run off the road the other day and suffered a crash that no one knows how he survived.
Oh, my goodness.
He was driving home to do his show. It was 6 p.m, and he's driven this road I don't know how many times. How many years? Like 20 years or something. And his car tipped over. I think he said he had kind of a Land Rover type large SUV vehicle. Tipped over into this ditch, rolled. He was taken to 2 different hospitals, in the ICU, neurosurgeons, all that. I mean, the guy survived, which everybody deemed wouldn't happen, the doctors. And so, was it a hit? You can Google it on YouTube. Actually, I'll put in the link to this as well, because it's of great interest, and he's done a lot to further everybody's knowledge with his shows and his website. So, who is behind stuff like that,
I know. And it takes private citizens to find out these things for the most part,
Right, and the public thinks that we've got judges and lawyers and police, and they're all out there to protect us and keep, terrible people from harming us, but we have a system of great harm going on right over our heads, and people are being hurt all the time. I mean, in many, many ways, not just plane crashes and car accidents and, mysterious murders. I've been told by Kay Griggs that, the whistleblower Kay Griggs, that the graduation exercise for the elite SEALs who become assassins, they're being trained to be assassins, are to just off somebody in a hotel, some, innocent stranger who's come to town. And these cases never get solved. And because the victims' families are very far away, there's very, very little people can do to inquire. So I actually know of a case like that where a college girl was murdered in her apartment. And because her family didn't live in town, nobody really tried to solve it. And it happened in New Orleans, and there is a lot of SEAL training there. So you just have to ask yourself, these cases that nobody cares about, what are they? And graduation exercises just off someone? I mean, I'm just quoting what I learned from Kay Griggs' interviews and her talks that I had with her subsequently. But we have a very strange you could say, social morality in place, if you include this as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And the thing is if people are willing to sit on a jury and dispense the death penalty, they should have the courage to investigate some of this, you know.
So you're saying...
Go ahead.
The jurors who dispensed the death penalty, it would behoove them to know what else is going on?
Yes, very much so. Being in that position, I wasn't gonna talk about these things with them. Somebody did say something during one of our breaks about a certain recent case, and I couldn't just let what I believe is not true to stand, so I challenged what the person said. I was laughed at by two of the other jurors, but I'm glad I brought it up. Actually, somebody else showed a little more interest in what I was saying, but I think,
I remember you telling me about that, and I'm just going to clarify. You weren't talking about a court case or a lawsuit. You were talking about a deception that has been trotted out for us to, world news, false flag, and you mentioned something about it.
Yes. That
would have edified or educated the person who made the comment, and you were laughed at.
Right.
Like equivalent to the 9/11 scenario, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, people barely know what Sandy Hook was.
Yeah.
And they're just unprepared for having their mind, stretched like that suddenly.
Right, and because we know so much, it's so hard to know where to begin with. You obviously don't want to get into stuff that is too far-fetched for most people, but if you can tell them something that they could maybe, see as possibly plausible, that's another matter. And so, I had something I was going to say about this. Oh, I know what it was. I wondered why I got on the jury because of my, interest in these false flag events, and especially in the past, I've been sort of publicly outspoken, and I used to pass out DVDs, carry signs, and I'm sure that's had some effect. But I also got a lot of, I got a little pushback for those things, and I haven't done it in a long time. But I'm sure that, they know, the authorities know, about my interests and where I stand on these things. And so it's interesting to me that they didn't stop me from getting on this jury.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the authorities, how far does that penetrate? Mm-hmm. Does it penetrate to jury duty in Riverside Court and the lawyers? You're talking about the lawyers the defense and the prosecution, who are the ones who select the jury. They
right.
each select the people they can live with,
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying they would have known that you are...
Well, maybe they didn't know, but people higher up, know, and they have their connections down lower, So if they wanted to step in, they could, but probably didn't they didn't have any influence. But I was just thinking that's a possibility. But in reality, it probably didn't have anything to do with it. It just seemed kind of odd to me that I would get on a trial like this,
Well, maybe, and maybe not. Maybe they had no issue with, they didn't want to quibble about what websites you go to and what and that it wouldn't affect the outcome anyway. I mean, really what affects this kind of thing is, I would guess, whether you are willing to convict and give the death penalty or not, mm-hmm. really. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's such a cut and dry, black and white decision. I mean, there are people who wouldn't do that under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So that scale, the point that you picked and others picked and where they were on that scale probably had a lot to do with how people got on that jury or not.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
And then level of intelligence, socioeconomic, class, background, education. I mean, you're a person who's extremely well educated, and, to say nothing of having gone to law school, so you know something about legal procedure, even though you're not a practicing lawyer. So, that puts you probably on the ladder of, if there were 12 rungs on that jury ladder, you might have been up at the top. But I don't know. I don't know who else was on it. So you have mentioned, but it doesn't help me to figure out where you might have been on that ladder.
Sure.
And what the rest of the ladder looked like. I just think it's very interesting to make a decision like this. Interesting is the wrong word. It's a very, like I said earlier, heavy thing to have to live with for the rest of your life,
Yeah, it's true. So, but as you pointed out, there's this terrible stuff going up on higher levels that never gets dealt with,
Yeah, look at the pedophilia. Look at all the lives ruined. Look at the human sacrifices. And, I'm not even talking about hits on Jeff Rense.
Mm-hmm.
That's bad. Very bad if that's what it was. But, my God, there's like an industry.
Yeah, and if people want to do the research, it's very easy to find out about some of these things. They just need to do it. I mean, I'll mention this. If anybody who's listening who hasn't seen Evidence of Revision, which is in this total of 6 parts now, but it was 5 parts initially. Parts 4 and 5, it's a deal with the Robert Kennedy assassination. Let me just put it this way. There's the person who was convicted of that crime has received a very, very unfair penalty for what I believe, did not do.
So this is Sirhan,
Yes.
RFK,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's in for life without parole.
Right. So something like that. So I had my, I had my antenna out. I definitely didn't want to see any innocent person go to prison. And that's why a case that would be somewhat difficult to determine the guilt of would be really hard for me, because I really wouldn't want to see, an innocent person punished. So, so I think I would be good. I think I would be good on a trial like one of those, but it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult, more than this one was, even though this was very difficult too, and is difficult still. So, but I hope...
Well, look at O.J. Simpson and how long that one took.
Yes.
And what a circus they made out of it.
I know.
So
I feel like we contributed. Unfortunately, the society, we have such problems higher up, and hopefully, one day we'll be able to fix those problems. It's an uphill battle, but it's something we have to be involved in. And I'll tell you something about this trial that's been a good thing for me personally. I think it's given me a little bit more courage to be a little more outspoken than I have been recently about things.
And how did it do that?
I don't know exactly why, but I guess probably it's that here I am doing this, and this is a low level criminal that we're dealing with. But why should we? If I'm going to be involved in that, I have to stand up somewhat about higher up criminality, and at least speak out about it sometimes. And when people are telling a false narrative, and I think I told you about this. When I was at the LA Times Festival of Books, I asked a question of people. They were talking about various types of government corruption, and I had to speak out. So I did. And I'm glad I did. And I think maybe that...
So this was in some kind of session with an audience?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was good. I mean, I didn't get any positive feedback from anybody. I didn't get any real negative feedback, but at least I spoke, So that was good, And I just think that, people shouldn't be afraid. I think we shouldn't be afraid to tell the truth, especially when it's going to, not cost us that much. We have to start standing up. People have to start standing up, and it's just our duty. Otherwise, we'll just, continue to be swept away the way we are.
Right. So you're saying we shouldn't be reticent.
Yeah, we shouldn't be reticent. And I think if you hear something enough times, you're going to become interested in it. I think I've heard you say that, something advertising needs to hit you like 7 times or more for you to,
to buy. 5 to 7 exposures, you have to see a product before you finally say, all right, I'll buy it.
Right.
Unless you want to buy it right away, and those people might be simply the easy sell. But then if you see something enough times, your likelihood of wanting to get it is much higher. Yeah, so on this reticence thing, I know in my life I've experienced times when something has run away with my body and my mouth. I have just stood up when I never expected I would. I'm talking about like a group setting, and I've just raised my hand and I have said something. And I thought later, why did I do that? And I don't remember exact incidents, but I remember this happening to me many, many times. I'll just walk forward and I'll find myself saying something, and I'll be very outspoken, and you could say a sort of risky situation. And that's what we need to do more of.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, you participated in something very, you could say, in the ordinary person's life, it doesn't occur to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the way that it went is significant. And so if you had to invest yourself to make that kind of a decision, then yeah, get out there and get visible.
Yeah. Maybe in a sense we're because we found for the death penalty, this was in a way we owe society to do something to make it better in other ways. That in it, the death penalty itself. That's a terrible thing to have somebody put to death. But maybe in a sense I have a debt now to be more outspoken.
Well, you never know what'll happen. I remember a friend telling me she was on a trial and she was not in agreement with a juror, and they were actually, they became an impediment to the resolution. The jury was frustrated with the two of them, and they really had gotten on each other's nerves. So I don't know how the verdict was given or what the jury said in the end, but I remember this woman, I saw her, and she was telling us about this, and she said that the other day she saw that particular juror, the woman that she had so much conflict with, saw her at Costco or somewhere. Mm-hmm. And they just both started to cry, and they ran up to each other and hugged each other and said how sorry they were. Mm-hmm. It was kind of hilarious, that here they were locking horns on the jury, but afterwards they made up and became friends. So you never know. You might see some of those jurors. You might be able to say something and have coffee and say, let's do more. Yeah. You might be able to enlighten them. I don't know.
I liked them all. So I got along with them. We got along, but we did have our contentions, So, and I think that's part of the problem, is that you feel that too when you're in conflict with other jurors and you're talking about these things, and there's so much involved that, that takes its toll.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carl, for your generosity in sharing this personal experience of yours and your feelings about it. And I don't know what will happen to this particular defendant if the appeals process will be successful. I think you said it automatically goes to appeal.
I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is more, public funds, and I guess it gives the public officials, I think judges are considered public officials, are they?
Yeah.
Something to do. keeps people busy. But anyway,
It's true.
I appreciate your time, and
Thank you, Sophia. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it went well by your light. So
oh yeah, no problem.
good. My first
And
interview.
your first interview,
Yes.
there you go. Now, look at that. Now you can start doing more interviews and become more visible. And it all starts. It has to start somewhere. So I'm glad that I gave you your jump start.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I will let you go. And thanks again. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Sophia.